Hello all. In this video, we're back in the Group C era, looking at another single-season flash in the pan of the sports car world, the Aston Martin AMR1. Though short-lived, it was nevertheless a remarkably advanced design that foreshadowed some developments that would reach their maturity much later, or represented compelling alternate directions the class could have explored were it to have lasted longer. The car was Aston Martin's final contribution to the Group C era, but was also the vehicle with which they were most involved, after contributing engines to the poorly named but not unsuccessful Nimrod NRA/C2 and EMCA vehicles of the early 80s. In 1987, a joint venture project was announced between Aston and the newly formed Proteus Technologies Group, founded by a consortium of British racing drivers, engineers, and team managers, primarily from Écurie Écosse. They brought in Reeves Callaway, generally known as a manufacturer of turbo conversion kits for various German automobiles, and recently chosen by General Motors to provide factory-option twin turbos for the contemporaneous Corvette, to build the engine under the direction of Ray Malek, while Max Bostrom designed the vehicle's body. Callaway started by taking the 5.3-liter V8 from the new Virage as a base, an engine on which he had also consulted, throwing away the Chrysler 3-speed automatic slush box that was fitted to most of the cars, and giving the engine a general going-over. That's not to say the 5.3-liter in the Virage was an inherently flawed power plant. Rowan Atkinson was particularly fond of his, and in road-going trim it produced about 330 horsepower, 364 pound-feet of torque, and a very lovely sound. But in the late Group C era, with the recently debuted Sauber Mercedes C9 pushing north of 720 horsepower, and Porsche 962s pushing God knows what from their flat sixes, depending on the team running them, well, sometimes you do just need power! So out went the stock head with its 2 valves per cylinder, and on went a new unit with 4. A number of engines, from 5 liters to 6, were tested, but eventually the ever-present truism about there being no replacement for displacement won out, and the 6-liter unit was chosen for further development. Additional tuning brought the engine up to more than 700 horsepower and a rev limit around 7,500 RPM, without sacrificing reliability and maintaining its natural aspiration. And it received its poetic moniker, RDP-87. Actually sounds like an astromech droid from Star Wars, but we can pretend it stands for Really Damn Powerful 87. This engine was fitted to a custom-engineered 5-speed manual transmission built by Aston Martin Racing with Hewland internals, with drive shafts of unequal length to allow for ground-effect Venturi tunnels to be designed into the underbody of the car. The chassis and body design, undertaken by Swedish-Canadian who somehow ended up in England, Mr. Max Bostrom, while outwardly rather simple-looking, belie an exceptional level of thought and cleverness, particularly in the aerodynamic realm, of which the aforementioned unequal drive shafts and ground effects were but a small part. Mr. Bostrom leveraged his previous experience at McLaren, Brabham, and Écurie, and designed what was essentially a Formula One car with a full body on top, which allowed him greater flexibility in accommodating for airflow, cooling, and driver convenience. The wedge shape hid the fact that the engine was mounted at an angle, to further improve underbody aero, while the rear angled slightly inward to better channel air into the side-mounted radiators. All of the bodywork was Kevlar and carbon fiber, mounted on a carbon fiber monocoque with aluminum-reinforced floor panels. Suspension was double wishbones and coilovers, as you'd expect, and AP provided cross-drilled and ventilated disc brakes. The wheels came from a firm called Dynamag, conveniently founded, owned, and operated by a certain Mr. Max Bostrom, and wore Goodyear tires. Mobil 1 signed on as title sponsor for the 1989 season, lending the AMR its quite fetching white, red, and blue livery, and everything seemed well placed for the team to go racing, with several promising test sessions at Silverstone, until a rear wheel hub failure during a test at Donington heavily damaged chassis number 2, delaying their debut originally planned for the season opener at Suzuka. This also had the not insignificant knock-on effect of costing them $250,000 in fines from the FIA, who had kindly mandated that attendance at all rounds of the championship was mandatory for all Group C1 cars. Flexible, understanding chaps that they are. Debuting instead at a test session ahead of the second round in Dijon, they did compete in the remainder of the championship and at Le Mans, but with chassis numbers 1 and 3 instead of 3 and 4 as originally planned. The first chassis was intended merely for testing purposes and was consequently about 40 kilograms heavier, harming its performance. They were also down on top speed relative to their competitors, partly due to the inherently high downforce design of the bodywork, but also due to a dearth of testing miles, particularly at high-speed circuits. This, when coupled with the general immaturity of the design, led to a rather trying outing at Les Arth, but chassis number 1, race number 19, managed to notch 10th overall in class, with the other car coming 18th. Post-Le Mans, the team embarked on a further test campaign and skipped the third round of the championship, I guess because they'd already paid their fine, and so it was a sunk cost at that point, integrating a number of incremental suspension and aerodynamic improvements into chassis number 4 to improve its drivability, as well as shaving another 20 kilos off chassis number 3's weight. A number of mid-pack finishes came during the rest of the championship, unable to cope with the absolutely dominant Sauber Mercedes cars, Jag's experience and versatility, or the sheer number of the Porsches. But further improvements were in the works for the 1990 season, including a more powerful 6.3-liter engine and aerodynamics reworked by the seemingly omnipresent Mr. Tony Southgate. However, Aston had recently come under the ownership of Ford, who also owned Jag, and corporate politics came into play yet again. Ford didn't want to be paying for 2 prototype racing programs at the same time, and with rule changes coming in for the 1990s in Group C and the last in first out policy, meant that the AMR1 met an early demise. Yet another promising racer gone too soon. At least one has made it into private hands and races at historic events in Europe. Photos for this video were taken at the 2023 Le Mans Classic. That brings us to the end of another video. As always, thank you for watching, and for this week's call to action not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe.
It's the 1st of September, if you're watching on the date of publication, and that means it's time for Christmas decorations to be appearing in stores, at least in the US. If any of you, dear viewers, happen to be individuals involved in store merch planning, or know others who are, please take the time to discuss with them the perils of premature holiday advertising and the needlessness of it. Nobody cares about inflatable Santas when it's still beach weather in most of the country, even if those inflatable Santas are wearing swim trunks. For those of you without such connections, next time you see a store manager where such decorations have appeared prematurely, perhaps drop them a gentle comment instead and hope that the feedback makes its way up the retailer chain. Have a good evening, all.